Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and I welcome you to this week's version of Mercy Unbound. It's a series that aims to provide hope, an avenue for healing, and one that will help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. And what we're going to talk about today is a fascinating topic. I've been interested in it for years. And we have as a special guest, Dr. Stephen Mattingly, PhD. He was professor of microbiology and immunology at the University of Texas Health Center in San Antonio for 33 years, past president of the Texas branch of the American Society for Microbiology. And I read his interesting book, The Jesus Microbiome, and you can get it at Amazon.com, but I suggest you get a copy because this is one of these unique experiences where science and faith can coexist. And he's going to explain to us his hypotheses, which he's able to reproduce on how the shroud formed. A microbiome is a body of microorganisms that inhabit a certain environment. And we're going to talk about how this all was created from the flesh and the blood of Jesus Christ and the underlying process that led to this particular image being formed. And as I mentioned, Dr. Mattingly has repeated his own experiments and reproduced the work. Dr. Mattingly, let's talk a little bit about the man in the shroud, whose image is on the shroud, I should say. We know that he was scourged and had many wounds and abrasions. He underwent a terrible crucifixion. He suffered a painful death. His body, thinking of microbiology, it was a tremendous culture medium. You had the heat, you had all the blood loss, you had the albumin and coming out. And you stated that in the 3 hours he was on the cross, the bacterial count doubled every 30 minutes. Share with us what was going on from a microbiologic standpoint with all his skin cells, the bacteria. You got the linen of the shroud that is primarily made up of cellulose or complex sugars. Walk us through this microbiologic process that was going on.
Well, first, let me thank you for the invitation to talk to you about this. I've been at this for about 25 years, and it didn't come to me just overnight. It's taken a lot of pause and thinking, and you can't really do experiments on the shroud, so you have to set experiments up that to try to replicate what you are seeing on the shroud. And we all face it. Anybody interested in the shroud, that's what we have to do. We have to try to, create situations that mimic what happened to Jesus. The man of the shroud or Jesus. I mean, I think the proof is so overwhelming that I tend to refer to him as Jesus because of the reference in the Gospels. This crucifixion of Jesus probably, from what we read in scriptures, began in the early morning, 6, 7, 8 o'clock, something like that, and then he died at 3 o'clock. So we have 6 to 8 hours or so, a time frame that we need to look at what was going on. And apparently he was scourged very early, and on the shroud you can count at least 100 scourge marks. And the Romans were very efficient, and they did this probably every day, and they would use this as an example to the citizens of the particular town. They would crucify individuals and put them just outside the town. So as you came into the town, you were confronted with this ghastly scene, and the message was, behave yourself or you'll end up like these people. So when you nick the skin like the Romans were good at doing, the body bleeds. And it just, with that many lacerations, and it looked like he was beaten from behind, but with his arms up in the air. But the whip marks came around to the front also, from what we see on the shroud. So um, that if that isn't bad enough, then you put a crown of thorns, and it really, from what it looks like, it was a cap of thorns, not an actual crown. So it covered his entire head, and then this was pounded into the skull. And anybody that has had a head wound knows that it bleeds all the time. I mean, it's just very, very difficult to get it to stop. So basically, what we have here within a few hours is a man that's covered in blood. They usually strip these people, so he was probably naked. And so, what you're in your mind, you ought to think about just a totally bloody individual, um, and it was continuous. Well, there's a consequence to that, and the consequence is that his own bacteria, the bacteria that are on his skin and our skin, had all the nutrients they needed to begin to grow. When we grow staph epidermidis, and I'm going to call it staph epi if you don't mind.
That's what I know it as.
Right. When you grow staph epi, and I have done this with medical students, probably 200 per class for almost 30 years. One of the first exercises we did was we had them take a swab and wipe it over their hand, and then put it on a blood agar plate, and then spread it out. And within 6 to 8 hours in the afternoon, and we'd look at them, we could see tiny little colonies already there. This organism really grows fast compared to other skin bacteria. And I might say there are over 1,000 different species of skin bacteria, but staph epi is the predominant one. And if that wasn't enough, the fact that Jesus probably, or I should say, certainly began to sweat, and the sweat is composed of basically sodium chloride, also began to cover his body. Well, this is just the exact conditions that staph epi needs, because we have commercial culture media that incorporate 7 to 10% sodium chloride for us to isolate only staph epi or Staph aureus, the two prominent ones. The Staph epi is the one that's on all of our skin. Staph aureus is the one that can cause boils and cause infections. So we're presuming Jesus was a normal individual coated with Staph epi, and these organisms begin to grow immediately. And this is the nutrient. Blood is what we use to grow them. So they had access to the blood, plus they had the salt, sodium chloride. So that the sodium chloride would tend to inhibit all the other bacteria and only allow the staph epidermidis to grow. And this is interesting because staph epidermidis produces very sticky polysaccharides. And you don't really know that they're there until you begin to see the effect that they can have. But let's say up to the time he was put on the cross at 12 o'clock, he had certainly sweated a lot, it bled a lot. But I really doubt that there were enough bacteria that would have shown, if he died, let's say, at 12 o'clock before he was went through 3 more hours, probably we wouldn't see anything. If you used an electron microscope, you could probably see bacteria, because all of us, when we have clothing or towels or whatever, we're leaving traces of our own skin bacteria. In fact, forensic science is using that technique now to help identify, and when they don't have human DNA, they're going to bacterial DNA. And these organisms on our skin are there in particular proportions. So it's like an identity marker. So this is coming along. You're going to hear about it in forensics before too long. But in any case, we now have Jesus that he's covered with blood. He's got a lot of bacteria growing on him. But if, like I say, if you were to put him in wrap him in the shroud, you probably would just probably only see the blood after the body is cleaned. There'd be traces of blood. You probably need at least 1 million bacteria per square centimeter to begin to see that yellow color that's characteristic. Now, I just want to stop and remind people that the yellow color that we're seeing on the shroud is no different than the yellow color that you see with your collars and ring around the collar. We'll get into discussing what that yellow color is, but the fact that Jesus was on the cross at 12 o'clock and there are 6 doublings. There's an opportunity for 6 doublings of the streptococci on his skin due to the blood. And so we can go, very quickly, exponentially, 4,000, 8,000, 16, 32. You can just do it in your head and see we can quickly get up to the millions. And then with that in mind, once he's taken down from the cross, he's obviously a bloody mess, and he's in rigor mortis. And when they finally get him in to clean him up, and I've done this experiment myself, I've coated my hand with staph epi at high levels, and it is virtually impossible to wipe it off the body because it is so sticky. So when they cleaned the body, and they did a very good job cleaning Jesus's body, what they essentially did was smear it all over his entire body. So it was an even coating, and even his hair. I don't know if you noticed, but his hair is braided in the back in a ponytail, and that you could see that on the shroud. But the washing of the body was so important because what it did was it just spread the bacteria out evenly, and we get this nice image then. So how in the world can you get an image then from these bacteria? Once the body was washed and they covered the body with the linen and left, the bacteria, not the bacteria, I'm sorry, the polysaccharides that had been produced by the bacteria, these are very sticky. And that's why they hold the bacteria to our skin, because they're producing a very sticky polysaccharide. It's like glue. It's one of the best glues you can imagine, because when I coated my hand and pulled the linen off, it pulled the hairs out of the back of my hand. It was very painful. So, the body still is oozing some liquid, and as it's oozing water, fluids, the linen is attracted to that, as well as the polysaccharides. And what happens is it's pulling the linen tighter and tighter around the body. It's a dynamic process. You just can't take a dead body and wrap it and expect this to happen. We needed a crucifixion. We needed the body to still be oozing fluid. And under these conditions, then the linen sealed itself around the body. And when the body, by whatever means, the bacteria, the excess bacteria that was on the body was pulled off onto the linen. And the yellow color that you see is really due to the oxidation, the breakdown of fatty acid material, lipids, fatty acids that are present in cell membranes. These oxidize very quickly and turn yellow. There's a variety of oxidation products. When I saw that, I knew right away that the color was due to the presence of these unsaturated fatty acids. So when you think of the shroud and the body essentially painted the linen with bacteria that were bound to the body, and it was actually kind of a combination of an oil painting from the lipids and a watercolor painting from there are lipids that are water soluble. Probably in time, the water soluble lipids would dissipate in the atmosphere. It's when you have a watercolor painting, you always have to put a glass in front of it, or it fades on you. Not the case with oil painting. So the shroud really is an oil painting by the body of Jesus.
And as you said, the shroud was absorbing those fluids. I think of something, maybe isn't it like a paper towel that pulls the liquids in, and that would form more of the sheath with
the if you think of linen was one of the favorite fabrics back then because it pulled water from the body and it kept people cool. This linen probably was not intended as a burial linen. It's a very fine linen. People have suggested that it may have been for a dinner table or a banquet table, and it was the only thing that they had readily available to put the body in. But it was that linen will soak up any liquid, particularly water, and because of the excess number of bacteria, they will come along with it, and you'll see them on the shroud.
Now, Dr. Mattingly, for many people, I think they remember the carbon dating back in the 80s, and that was like the definitive conclusion that the shroud was not from the time of Jesus, from the Middle Ages. What's your thoughts on how the carbon dating was flawed? And hasn't someone who was very high up in the investigation using the carbon dating, hasn't he made comments on your microbiologic hypothesis?
When I remember watching on television, I kind of knew about the shroud in 1988. I wasn't paying that much attention to it. But when I heard that they were going to announce the actual carbon date of the shroud, I watched it live on television. It was 1260. They wrote on the blackboard 1260 to 1390. And I thought to myself, well, that settles that. This is no way it could be the shroud of Jesus. And it began in the mid 90s. I began to think a little bit more. That was a very kind of off the cuff thought. I began to think in terms of the nature of the linen itself, and the fact that any cloth like that is that old has got a huge accumulation of microorganisms. You just living a life, that to be the fact, because if you leave clothes around, they start stinking and smelly, and they become discolored. So that microorganisms will coat any kind of fabric, any kind of a surface coat like that. And I began to, my expertise is in cell polysaccharides and cell wall polysaccharides, capsular polysaccharides. So I thought, well, linen is cellulose. It's a beta-1,4 glucose linkage, real long strands with occasional branches, very simple. And then I thought, well, cell walls of bacteria and fungi are beta-1,4 linkages. You add some amino groups on, and they become chitin in the case of fungi and peptidoglycan in the case of bacteria. But the amount of nitrogen is very low, and it's easy for bacteria to cleave the nitrogen molecules off. They have enzymes that can easily release those. So what are you left with? You are left with beta-1,4 glucose. You're left with cellulose. So how in the world can you distinguish between the cellulose of the linen and the cellulose produced by fungi and bacteria? You can't. So This news is not out there yet in the public. It will be with this book. And I think this is one of the major contributions of this book, is that we are correcting a terrible scientific injustice that was done to the shroud, not intentionally, but science has to be responsible for the when you make announcements like that. I mean, they made very strong statements, and any scientist will hold back. But I can tell you that this finding, and I did it. I took some bacteria that was from the air and grew it on cellulose, and then I tried to clean it with the techniques they use to clean the shroud. You could only remove a little bit, about 15-20%. The rest of it stayed on, because most of bacteria and fungi is cell wall material, peptidoglycan and chitin, and that's what protects the cell. So on a dry weight basis, it's mainly cellulose. So we don't normally refer to bacterial cell walls as being cellular, but the basic feature is there. And all you need are some enzymes to remove these amino acids, and you have cellulose. So this really indicates that we'll never be able to carbon date the shroud. I use carbon dating in my research many years. I know the power of the technique, but in this case, you really have to know what you're carbon dating. And they made the assumption, they didn't do any kind of a chemical test to show that when they did their cleaning techniques, that they actually accomplished anything. There was no chemistry done, so we don't know what it was. But now we know that they can't possibly clean it. If they cleaned it, if you try to get rid of peptidoglycan or chitin by their techniques, it won't work. You have to use very strong acid, 6-normal HCl, for 24 hours at 100 degrees. They used 2 hours at 80 degrees with 1 normal hydrochloric and 1 normal sodium hydroxide. There's not sufficient energy there to break those bonds. So it is very much, and we'll probably never get a carbon date. We just have to satisfy ourselves. We have to find other ways of dating this shroud.
And didn't one of the researchers, though, in the carbon-14 experiments look at your work and make some comments?
The people that made comments, and these are in the book, we included these comments in the book, really don't have the chemistry, the microbiology background to really make those kind of statements and really understand what I'm talking about. It's a little more complex, but the people in my field will quickly agree with me and understand what I'm talking about.
Right. To me, it's fascinating because here we have science explaining something, and it doesn't contradict faith. It doesn't refute faith. But again, it doesn't explain, and this isn't your area of expertise, and I don't want to go down that road, but there's no evidence that the shrouds or the body was moved, was there, on the shroud?
That's right. When you look at the shroud, and pathologists have done this work, there is no, if you look at the blood areas, there's no blurring, there's no scraping, there's nothing to indicate that anything happened to the body. In our view, the body simply dematerialized in some fashion, and science it cannot explain that. That's part of the mystery, and I think that gets you into the area of faith. But up to that point, science can explain everything.
Right. Now, again, the shroud never deteriorated. And was that because the bacteria kind of fused with the shroud linen itself and formed this protective covering? Because shouldn't the shroud have deteriorated?
That's a good question. And microorganisms come to the rescue. They're not consuming the shroud. I'm going to show you. A little piece of cellulose that I coated. Can you see this?
Yeah, lift it up a little higher. There you go. Okay, I see it.
This is cellulose material that I coated with Bacillus subtilis, which is an airborne bacterium. And I let it grow on this. And it only took me 2 or 3 days. And I had, by weight, 60% of this material is now bacteria, 40% is cellulose. So that number takes you back to the 1st century. This is what the shroud actually looks like. And what happens is these organisms are protecting it. They're growing on it. They're not consuming it. They're falling on it constantly. When it's exposed, if you ever take a Petri plate and expose it to the air for a couple of hours, it's one of the things we do with students to make them aware that microorganisms are in the air and they're constantly falling. They will fall on this and begin to grow a little bit. They consume each other, but they enter into a situation in which they are able to survive and begin to grow, but not consuming the shroud. To break this down, you need the enzyme cellulase. You only find cellulase in the soil. So, when they bury a body that's in a shroud, yes, it's going to break down the body and the shroud. But the shroud never was put into the soil. So it never suffered that fate. And it became coated with these bacteria, which now have protected it.
I see. So you've got no evidence of body movement. The body's not present, which is not your purview to explain, but you can explain how the image formed. And didn't you reproduce some of these experiments, like putting bacteria on your face?
I did. I did my own face, and that there's a photograph in the book. It's not a pleasant thing to do, and I had my wife coat my face, and it smelled. The smell was so bad that she chased me out of the house, and I had to find the lounge chair that I laid down in and let it dry on my face, and then it created a remarkable image. There's a picture of it in the book, and I might just add that when I took it off my face, my gutter and my fence were lined with blackbirds. Didn't exactly know what I was, whether I was their next meal or just exactly what was going on.
That's funny. Tell me maybe the major argument or 1 or 2 arguments against your hypotheses, and in your opinion, do they hold water?
You really can't argue against this hypothesis, because you'd have to say, well, the body never came in contact with the shroud. And that's just not the case. The body did come in contact with the shroud. We know that because of the blood. And you can't say that the image is created by, let's say, radiation at the time of resurrection. I know that's what a lot of people would like to believe, but think about it. Radiation is a natural phenomenon, and we're talking about a supernatural event. We cannot use natural explanations to explain the resurrection. It's beyond that, and it's very clear now that it is. So you really, to have a hypothesis against what I'm saying here, you'd have to argue against contact, and the blood shows that there was contact.
What's fascinating to me is this is just basic microbiology, basic science. It's been staring at us at the face for 2,000 years. All this is mentioned in your book, The Jesus Microbiome, available at Amazon.com. Dr. Mattingly, in closing, any other points you'd like to share with the audience, or we'll close with any closing thoughts?
It's been an interesting journey for me. I didn't just overnight come up with these ideas. There was a lot of prayer, a lot of thought. I remember at one point writing about the crucifixion, about the ordeal of what Jesus went through, and I told my wife, I said, I just can't go through with this because this is too real to me. I'm seeing Jesus. I'm seeing what this polysaccharide and these bacteria are doing to him. They're attracting flies. Any debris that comes around sticks to his body. It was the worst kind of situation you can imagine, and I had all that in my head, and I had to walk away from it for a while. But then I came back, and Roy has been a wonderful co-author with me and sharing so many of these adventures. I'd say we've been working on this book for 5 years. I've been working on the Shroud for 25 years, aspects of it. It has been the most incredible journey that I could ever have imagined.
Well, it's fascinating. And, I want to thank you for all your work. And again, people, get this book, The Jesus Microbiome. Dr. Stephen Mattingly with Roy Orgisi, a friend of mine as well. And I want to thank you, Dr. Mattingly, for joining us on Mercy Unbound. And, the truth will set us free. And listeners, thank you for watching this show, and share this with everyone you can. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Mercy Unbound. And God bless. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/Dr. Bryan, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbryanThatcher.com.